Welcome back to Performance Process. My name is Ronan Mc Laughlin and I'll be your host as usual. Today we're back talking about aerodynamics and specifically the complications of aerodynamics. How often have you heard someone say my CDA is 0.19 or Remco's CDA is 0.17 or this is the fastest wheel or that's the fastest frame they've ever tested, blah, blah, blah. The problem is that all of these assume aerodynamics is a single fixed number or a universal truth, and it simply isn't. Your effective CDA shifts constantly with speed, yaw, temperature, altitude, and you better believe it changes as we fatigue. That's not to mention the fact, as we all know, that what proves fastest for one rider might be slower for another, yet testing is still essential if you want to go faster. So how do we make sense of that paradox? To help untangle it, I'm joined by Tom Epton. Tom's a data scientist and elite athlete, a wind tunnel tester who works across endurance sports. We're going to break down why your aero setup is never set in stone, why copying someone else's numbers won't make you faster, and why, despite being just a snapshot in time, why testing is still one of the most valuable tools we can use. So, Tom, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Good to have you here. You and I have been DMing back and forth for as long as I can remember, and you've done, you do a lot of work with my windsock, and it's usually about that. Before we delve into the weeds of this conversation we're about to have, do you want to give listeners a sense of your background? As I mentioned, you're a data scientist and an athlete. You do consultancy work, tunnel testing. How do all those pieces fit together?
Well, I started off, I guess the first kind of step into it was I went to university to study for a degree in physics, which I managed to get. Then while I was at university, I actually got into triathlon. Before that, I was swimming a little bit and running a bit as a kid. But yeah, I really got into triathlon actually when I was at uni, and really got into triathlon. Ended up racing professionally and have done a couple of multi-sport championships and stuff for Great Britain, which has been good fun. During that time, I graduated university, worked a little bit in the ORC, in the Zeppelin Institute in Southampton, doing laser research, and then moved on to working. Actually, one of the first things I did out of that was I did a little bit of writing for Cycling Weekly, which got me into working with my windsock, which kind of spiraled into meeting Andy Turner and setting up aerodynamics and doing a bit of work at the wind tunnel. And all of that has, kind of got to where we are today, where now my week's pretty much split in two, actually, between aerodynamics and wind tunnel stuff. And then the other half of my life is the running algorithm, which is a training app that I founded along with my friends, which is a running integral part of triathlon, of course. And that's a machine learning powered training platform. So
you neglected to mention your Substack in there also.
Oh yeah, I also have a Substack. Sorry. I think it's the Mad Triathlete is the thing you have to Google if you want to find Substack. If you Google Tom Epton Substack, I write a lot about, mostly these days it's course previews, but I always use it to also have a whinge about something that's annoyed me. Those are its two primary purposes. And sometimes I write about my own lactate testing and wind tunnel results and stuff as well. So it's a bit of it's more like therapy for me with the big audience.
I don't know what that says about my writing, but I try not to think about it. I just hit publish and pretend it never happened.
Never read it again. Once you've written it, never read it again.
Yep. And just pretend nobody else reads it. You mentioned course previews there, and you messaged me about the upcoming Kigali Worlds, the time trial, and specifically the time trial Worlds, and how the Reynolds number drop at altitude there might affect things. Why did that strike you as an interesting thing to flag up?
It was mostly a thing that I didn't know how many people would have considered. I mean, in my head, at least, I found the altitude of Kigali Googling something completely unrelated to cycling and realized it was at altitude. And I was like, oh, worlds are there, aren't they? And it kind of just isn't, obviously, I mean, I don't know, but like even altitude training in Africa, the places that immediately come to mind for me is like Eton or the Rift Valley where all the runners go. But it's pretty high. I think it's like 1,600 meters average elevation is the course, something like that. but it's also quite flat. So it's like, well, it's hilly, but it's not a mountainous time trial, right? So it kind of crossed my mind as something that, I mean, if I was preparing for that race, it's a very like easily overlookable factor that could, the Reynolds number in Kigali, actually speaking of Andy Turner, I spoke to him about it as well. And he messaged, we sort of did a couple of calculations together, and it's not hugely different, but it's significant enough to make a difference to the result, but a handful of seconds over the 45k TT or however long it is. It's kind of one of those things where actually it's a situation where doing something that's slightly unconventional, maybe like using a slightly shallower front wheel, might make a significant difference. And it just seems to me to be like quite a concrete thing that a team could overlook. We've spoken in the past about how important it is to contextualize your setup to the environment that you're in. And it's just, one of those events where you might need to think slightly outside of the box of what you're doing.
Do you want to just break down for listeners why, we're talking about Reynolds numbers here, we're talking about altitude. What exactly is it that we're talking about, and what changes between sea level and Kigali?
I think the way to think about it is to like really start from the complete physics basics, which is there's a series of equations called the Navier-Stokes equations, which basically describe how air flows. And from them, you can do a bunch of clever maths and you can get the drag equation, right? That basically describes like if you have an object moving at a constant speed in a fluid or in air is a fluid, then what is the drag force on it? There is a series of things that go into it. It's the CDA is part of it. It's one of those numbers, but you also have the speed and the viscosity of the fluid that it's in. All of those things basically go in. So it's a mathematical function with a number of inputs, and all of those numbers change all the time. So the speed changes. CDA does change, but in the sense that you're wearing what you're wearing and your area is what your area is, right? Those two things don't change significantly, but the speed changes. So the drag force changes, the density of air changes as you go up and down a mountain, for example. So in Kigali, so we spoke about the Reynolds number being lower in Kigali because it's higher altitude, which means the viscosity of the fluid is relatively speaking lower. Like there's less air at 1600 meters than there is at sea level. And it's actually something that you kind of notice if you ever do ride on a really big mountain, is as you go over the top of a climb, it's really easy. Everyone always hits their highest kind of speeds on the ride right at the start of the descent. Actually, the thing that kind of limits you from speeding up a lot is air resistance, right? It gets exponentially higher and higher and higher as you go faster. And but when you're right at the top of a mountain, say you're 1600 meters or maybe even higher, 2000 meters, the air resistance is really, really much lower because the density of air is much lower. All of these factors that go into kind of aerodynamics, and the CDA is just a part of it. And all of these numbers throughout the course of a ride are changing. The way to think of it isn't a number. It's more of the way to think of it is a function, right? Which is a bit of a maths word, but basically it's kind of a continuously changing sum of algebraic constraints. That actually didn't make it simpler, did it?
I think basically what we're saying is if in some way you could keep everything else constant simply by going from sea level where, say, the 2021 Worlds were in Belgium to where the 2025 Worlds are in Kigali, we're going to get a change in one bit of that formula, which then and while the actual reality is everything's changing all the time, but we're seeing a significant change because of the lower pressure in that when we go to that sort of altitude.
Yeah, and it's actually it's something that you can adjust for in the wind tunnel, right? You can't take Silverstone and put it 2,000 meters above sea level, and nor can you blast less dense air through the wind tunnel, although that would be a neat trick. You can adjust you can adjust a number of the other kind of factors that you use. You can turn the temperature up. You can put the air through slower and stuff. So you can match the Reynolds number, and you can like roughly calculate what equipment is likely to be the fastest. But saying that, what equipment is likely to be the fastest is the way I would describe it, rather than saying this is the fastest, which is subtly different, but a slightly different.
That's a difference that we've delved into a few times on this podcast. But I think, As confusing as that conversation may have just sounded, listeners, Tom and I were having that conversation through Instagram DMs while I was on the beach on holidays,
You know how
drinking
to have a
pints.
good time.
So, but I think the conversation then for us turned to, yeah, like, and the sort of perceptions around aero. And I think I'd said to you something like, I think you're giving cycling too much credit to assume that everybody will have considered this before they go to the Worlds. And while the top teams may well, and the top riders, the likes of Remco and that, may well have aerodynamicists and that doing these calculations for them, for the majority of cycling, I think we still tend to treat aero as this single, or as this, this setup is faster than that one, when in reality the physics, it isn't that simple at all.
I mean, I don't know how many times I get a message that says, which helmet should I use? And I'm like, whatever one tests the fastest is the only answer that I can really give, right? Like, and I don't know how many times you see something that looks faster that isn't as well. I'm not the best at it, but there definitely is people that have a really good knack for kind of guessing what's the fastest. And there are bike fitters where if you have someone come into the tunnel who's had a bike fit with a certain person, it's much harder to find them improvements a lot of the time. But again, it's statistical, right? It's something on average, but actually on an individual basis, if you ask what wheel should I use, what helmet should I use, what skin suit should I wear, all of these questions, the answer is whatever's tested fastest in the specific context in which you're going to use it. And any other answer that someone gives you than that is wrong.
I mean, yeah, and that, there's two ways you could look at that. And there's two questions I maybe have for you off the back of that. And the first one is, I have a box here beside me with 10 helmets in it, and I have an aero sensor on the other side of me here. I could go out and test these 10 helmets today and find out what is the fastest helmet for me. First of all, could you take any value from knowing what is the fastest helmet for me from my test today? And secondly, can I take any value from it if everything's changing all the time and really it's just a snapshot of what was the fastest helmet today and no guarantees about tomorrow?
The short answer is no, and then yes. I can't, no. To me, it doesn't really matter what tests fastest on you, because there's so much that's different about any two riders, right? Like, our shoulders are different widths, our positions are different. Is your position UCI legal, for example? Like, if you have a UCI position versus a triathlon position, they're wildly different. The fastest helmet in with a UCI position is on the same rider is going to be massively different to the fastest helmet on a non-UCI legal position, especially if you're, a bigger rider or whatever, or just below the limits of UCI. Like, all of these things come into account. Can you take anything useful from it? Yes. The easiest way to get the most amount from it is to do more tests, right? Because if you do more tests in different environments, then actually you kind of get what comes out fastest on average. And that's the kind of way to look at it is actually, if you say you do a test where you test 5 helmets on the velodrome, you test 5 in the wind tunnel, and you test 5 on the road with an aero sensor, and then you test another 5 using body rocket, for example, then actually the same helmet coming out on top every single time, really useful, right? Probably is the fastest. Probably can say in that situation, this helmet, at least of the ones you've tested, is the fastest for me. Now, of course, as soon as someone else brings out a TT helmet, that you have to do it again. But so there's a kind of, it's like a treadmill that someone's gradually turning up just as you get on top of the speed. It's the reason, again, this is something that's kind of, you see at the top of cycling and triathlon, is the teams that consistently test the most are the best at time trials, because actually, if you have the freedom to, I mean, in cycling, you're slightly more limited by equipment constraints because you have to use what the team's sponsored by. In triathlons, some athletes do and some athletes don't. And I guess in CTT time trials, these are actually the top CTT guys are the most aero people, right? But they aren't really constrained by this. So the answer is yes, but up to a point. It's not like you're never going to be in a situation where you can declare that one helmet is 8 watts faster than another, and that is true for all time, because it may not be the case. And it also, if you then go and the following season you get a back injury or something and you have to change your position in order to account for that, you're not at square one, but you're at square one. Like, realistically, you have to retest the helmets when you change the position. It's a multifactorial optimization. It's not this helmet is the fastest, this wheel is the fastest, this skin suit is the fastest. The helmet interacts with the skin suit, and the skin suit is faster on one person than another because one person's got a different body shape.
Or different speed, or different yaw angle, or different...
You're continuously playing whack-a-mole is kind of the way to think about it. Or like, more like spinning plates, and people keep adding plates, you know?
And yeah, spinning plates is a good one because you have to go like back and forth to keep them spinning. And that's the question I always have is like, if the helmet interacts with the skin suit, and do you start by testing which is the fastest helmet and then test skin suits off of that, and then do you go back to helmets again? Where do you start and where do you end? And the answer is start anywhere and you never finish.
Yeah, but also it depends as well, like what your goals are and whether you're doing time trials, whether you're racing on the road, whether you're doing triathlon, how long your race is, all of those questions. Because actually, the importance of the skin suit for a 10, the importance of some aspects of the skin suit for a 10-mile TT, for example, it doesn't really matter if it's horribly uncomfortable and really hot, because it's like 18-minute race. Yeah. If you're right, or less if you're really fast. But for an Ironman, if you are in a skin suit that chafes, the marathon's going to be horrendous, right? So it's one again, like it's really context dependent as to which order you do these things in, and actually, and then obviously, some of the things you're fixed on, right? Like sometimes in a cycling context, you need to use a specific helmet because that's the helmet that your team is paid to ride in.
And how big is the swing, or like how big a swing have you seen? You mentioned if you took, I think you said 5 helmets to the wind tunnel, the velodrome, and outdoor testing, and I just mentioned aero sensor as a general term, and there is a brand called aero sensor, so other options are available also. But have you seen that flip, like the fastest helmet in one is way off in another?
I personally haven't done a huge amount of non-wind tunnel testing, so out on the outside especially. I think it's only this generation of aero sensors that are actually good enough, I think, to get too much that's meaningful out of it. But both aero sensor, and then there's also the other, I think it's VeloSense is the other.
There's aero sensor, there's Ghibli, there's Streamlines, and then I would class those as drag measurement systems. And then there's Body Rocket, which is it's actually it's not calculating, it's actually measuring.
Yeah, and obviously the drag measurement systems, you have all sorts of things like which power meter you're using and frequency of the power meter, and all of those things come into play. I have seen situations where you measure something in the wind tunnel and actually when you go outside, something else is faster. It does happen. The reason for that is when you pedal, you move around on the bike. Body Rocket have really interesting data on this from their, they have a sensor in the seat post, don't they? And actually you can see during kind of a race pace run how people shift on the saddle.
Yeah, actually when Eric from Body Rocket was talking me through the entire system, that was that was kind of the part that I was like, oh, I want to try that. I just want to see where and when I'm moving and see if that helps me figure out why.
Have you ridden with it at all?
No, I haven't. Beyond like sitting on a trainer and a trade show to as a demo.
It is really interesting. I've been on the velodrome in Brighton. I went down to have a go on it. Basically, Eric just invited me down. He was like, do you want to come and have a go at this? I was like, yeah, I do. It's really fun. The velodrome at Brighton has a hill in it. So if anyone...
Okay.
And back then, I know they've updated some of the sensors since then. So actually I won't talk specifically about the problems that they had then, because some of them, if not all of them, have actually been solved since then. It was genuinely a really like interesting experience. One of the interesting pieces of information is looking at how you shift around on the saddle, especially as you start going a bit harder. And actually, obviously that, and aero sensor have a similar sensor, which is that kind of, the laser measurement, which sits on the stem. Mm-hmm. And again, you can kind of see that, and it's really obvious, but soft pedaling in the wind tunnel versus doing, going over threshold during a 10-mile TT, you're not sat in exactly the same place. Like, obviously. So, yeah, your CDA does move for a whole bunch of reasons. Yeah, it moves a lot. It moves a lot under fatigue, actually. And broadly speaking, not in the right direction. You typically get, maybe it's a challenge for bike fitters to put someone in a position where they get more aero as they get tired rather than less. But most people get less aero as they get tired, as a general rule.
And that, coupled with everything we've already talked about, like things like altitude and speed and yaw angle, which can all directly or indirectly affect our effective CDA. I think that's what had both of us triggered in our DMs about the assumption that, oh, I've done a test and this is my CDA.
Yeah.
And you want to dig into what the risks around assuming that your CDA from one test is going to be applicable to forevermore, man?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a thing we get at my wind talk. Actually, you get sort of people saying my CDA is this. I did it in the wind tunnel, but when I did a time trial and I put that in, it was off by X number of seconds. More often than not, the answer is basically yes, but you sort of shift out the saddle when as you get tired, and you also sit up during a time trial to go round and round about whatever you break,
which would have a negative effect. But then you also have passing vehicles, which have a positive effect.
Exactly, and you have we're looking at solving actually the passing vehicles kind of not problem, but passing vehicle adjusting for passing vehicles and wind shear as well, stuff like that. Actually, it's quite interesting ways to solve those problems and improve the accuracy of predictions. But going to the wind tunnel is extremely useful, and I would wholeheartedly encourage people to book a wind tunnel test at Venturi Dynamics, of course. But it's not the case of you go once and forever, that is your fastest setup. It's definitely useful to only go once, for sure. Like you can find some really useful pieces of information in 2 hours in the wind tunnel. You can definitely get faster. The danger is I went to the wind tunnel, my CDA was this, or last time I was at the wind tunnel, my CDA was this. So your CDA for it, during a Club 10 or for a Club 10 even, it will be different with the same setup than it will be for an Ironman because there's a big speed difference. Your CDA doesn't exist. It's not a fixed number. It's a continuously changing function of variables, and those variables can be controlled in the wind tunnel so you can check certain things, but that's not to say that your CDA is your CDA forever. And Remco's CDA is low because in part he's tiny, and the other part is he tests a lot, so he always has the fastest elbow position, not necessarily always the fastest helmet because he's kind of stuck with the same helmet. But these kind of things that he does have the fastest helmet because they designed the helmet around him, which is a luxury that has not been afforded to me in the past. So
nor many of us.
Yeah, maybe there's a business 3D printing application there, right, where you can design a shell of an aero helmet around.
While I was away last week, I had a email come in. It was a press release for the new Scott time trial helmet, and I only briefly scanned it because I was away. But if I remember correctly, it's like modular, so you can change like the old Giro Advantage where you could attach different sized of sides to it. That's fantastic. So that's maybe as close as we can get.
Those helmets, the only thing is with the kind of modular helmets, and I don't know about this particular Scott. I've never used it. It's only just come out. But they always make a horrible noise because there's always a little gap, right? So it just sounds like there's something whistling past your ears the whole time. I don't know. I had the use the Endura Drag to Zero one for a while. Yeah, broadly, I really liked Endura's kind of given up on aerodynamics a little bit, but I really liked a lot of their kit. I raced in their tri-suit for ages, the Drag to Zero one. It consistently tested fastest on me, but the helmet was so annoying. Like, it was a good helmet and it was fast on me, but it was just so loud. It was just like continuous whistling. It made the most horrible noise, and it was because of the gap between the bit that attached and the bit that detached. It was the one that you used to be. You could use it as a road helmet or a TT helmet. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess the key to what we're talking about here is and you've mentioned we both said at the start fastest, and there isn't really a fastest, but then we've also both at various times throughout this referenced the fastest. I take from what you're saying is that, when you said that Endurasuit continually tests fastest for you, you're testing in the conditions representative for the event that you're preparing for.
Yeah.
How do you determine what those conditions are going to be? How do you bring those conditions into your testing? And how big of a factor is all that in what we're discussing here?
I think if you're the first thing I would say, and this is something I've seen a lot of with when people come to us if they've had aero tests with other people in the past, is, and actually just things I've seen when people message me and they send me their wind tunnel results. I get an ungodly number of like CSV files emailed to me on a weekly basis. But if you test your Ironman bike split, your Ironman setup at 50 kilometers an hour, it's useful when you're going 50 kilometers an hour, but it's not that useful if you're not, right? Like it's better than useless, but it's not as useful as it could be. I think the first thing that I will do is I will go into my windsock and I'll look at the distribution of speeds roughly for a kind of rough estimate of my CDA, which not actually fixed in my windsock, because you can change settings. So you can have a CDA for when you're sat up and a CDA for when you're in aero bars, and you can even have a CDA for when you're going over a certain number of power in a bar. You can change a lot of these things. So you can get quite a good idea roughly of the distribution of speeds you're going to be looking at. And then it's okay, right? What do we optimize for? Because a really interesting example is the Ironman World Championships course this year, because they have it. It's in Nice, right? And it's basically, the course is a big long climb at the start. So little flat road, big long climb. It's about an hour, 50 minutes, something like that. A big plateau, which is at 1,200 meters. So again, slightly different Reynolds number to sea level. And it's rolling. And then it's got a big descent. And the descent's maybe 20 minutes, something like that. So you actually have a really wide distribution of speeds. And actually setting up your bike for that event is quite an interesting challenge, because you have a climb, aerodynamics is still really important. Air resistance is still the dominant force that you're kind of overcoming during the course of the race. But the kind of challenges are different, and the speed distribution is different, because you have a lot of time at 20 kilometers an hour and you have a lot of time at 60 kilometers an hour. And even though your average speed might be 40, you don't have very much time at 40 kilometers an hour. So the way to start is, okay, at what time will I be at what speed will I be spending kind of most of my time? And that's what you want to optimize for, especially where you can optimize for that speed without taking away from other things. So say, for example, that you've got a course that's mostly flat with a hill in it, is actually, okay, fine. You're going to spend most of the time on the flat, but what you don't want to do is have a 20 kilo bike, even if it's more aero, because actually when you come up the climb, you're going to lose a lot of time on the climb. Extreme example, obviously, but so that's what I do is actually you kind of look at the context of the race. Sometimes it's really simple, right? Like sometimes it's an out and back course with you hit your kind of race air speed, because it's aerodynamics, which can be different to the ground speed, of course. You hit your race air speed, and other than the turnaround at halfway, it roughly stays the same the whole way through. So then you go to the wind tunnel and you test at that speed, problem solved, right? Really easy job. It's not often like that. And actually the best, a lot of this is a best guess. Like it's the reality of it is, okay, yeah, we're going to be spending, of this 4-hour bike race, we're going to be spending 3.5 hours, which is there's a half an hour climb and there's a 10-minute descent. And then we're going to spend the remaining 3 hours and 20 minutes at 45 kilometers an hour. So we'll test at that. And where we can optimize for weight without taking away from that speed, we will. And where we can't, then we don't. And that's kind of the way to do it. But the trick is to have someone setting up the experiment that understands that, rather than just going, okay, right, we're testing at 50 kilometers an hour because that's the average. That's what we do. Yeah. And, I've seen guys come in doing an Ironman at 50 or 48 kilometers an hour, and they come in with us and their CDA is a little bit higher, and they're kind of disappointed. And it's like, oh yeah, but you at least now you're making equipment changes that are actually relevant to your race speed, right? Because,
it's like FTP all over again. People don't care about the result of the race; they just want a lower CDA.
yeah. It's kind of that. Yeah, I paid £1,000 to come and get a lower CDA. That's all I want. It is definitely a little bit of that for sure, but it depends what you want, right? Like, yeah, if you want a lower CDA, then we can put you in an unsustainable position, turn the wind tunnel up to 50 kilometers an hour, and turn temperature up, and you can have one. but like that's not really the point, is it? Going and getting, bothering putting the time in.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So Head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.